The winter of 1412 arrived in the Kingdom of Portugal with a silence that settled over Lisbon like a veil of cold mist. The Tagus River moved slowly beneath the pale morning light, its waters carrying the reflection of merchant ships and fishing boats that swayed gently in the harbor. Along the cobblestone streets of the Alfama district, the scent of baking bread mingled with the salt of the sea, and the bells of the Say Cathedral tolled the hour with a somber resonance that echoed through the narrow alleyways and whitewashed walls. In the great hall of the Montero estate, a fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting long shadows across the tapestries that depicted hunting scenes and ancestral victories. The room smelled of oak smoke and aged wine, and the voices of young noblemen rose and fell like waves against a rocky shore. Rodrigo Montero stood apart from the others, his back against a carved pillar, his dark eyes fixed upon the dancing flames. At 29, he possessed the bearing of a man who had been groomed for command since birth. His features were sharp, aristocratic, framed by dark hair that fell in waves to his collar. The Montero family had served the crown for 7 generations, their loyalty rewarded with lands, titles, and a position at court that few could rival. Yet Rodrigo's expression held no satisfaction, no pride, only a restlessness that had grown familiar to him over the years, a hunger for something he could not name. "You are quiet tonight, Rodrigo," said Afonso de Braganza, approaching with a goblet of wine in each hand. He was a man of similar age but softer features, his smile easy, his manner careless in the way of those who had never known true hardship. "One might think you had received ill news." "One might think correctly," Rodrigo replied, accepting the offered goblet without enthusiasm. "My father has informed me that arrangements are being made for my betrothal to the daughter of the Count of Evora." Afonso raised his eyebrows. "Beatriz de Melo? She is considered quite beautiful. She is considered quite wealthy, and quite dull." Rodrigo took a long drink. "I have spoken with her precisely twice. On both occasions she discussed nothing but the weather and her embroidery. Marriage is not meant for conversation, my friend. It is meant for alliances and heirs. So I have been told, repeatedly." The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks against the iron grate. Across the room, the other young nobles had gathered around a table where dice were being thrown, and coins exchanged hands with the reckless abandon of men who had never earned their fortunes. Among them was Henrique Diaz, a man whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his appetite for wagers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the perpetual sneer that twisted his lips. "Montero!" Henrique called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Come, join us, unless you prefer to sulk in the shadows like a lovesick poet." Rodrigo felt his jaw tighten, but he pushed himself away from the pillar and crossed the room with measured steps. The game being played was simple enough, dice thrown, fortunes won and lost on the turn of ivory cubes. But Henrique's games were never truly about the dice. They were about power, about humiliation, about proving that those who stood above could crush those who stood below. "What is the stake tonight?" Rodrigo asked, his voice carefully neutral. Henrique smiled, a slow, predatory expression. "Ah, tonight we play for something more interesting than gold." He gestured toward the doorway, where a servant had appeared carrying a tray of additional wine. "Do you see that woman?" Rodrigo followed his gaze. The servant was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with skin the color of burnished mahogany and features that held a quiet, striking beauty. Her hair was covered by a simple linen coif, and her dress was the plain wool of a household servant, but she moved with a grace that seemed almost out of place in her humble station. Her eyes, dark and luminous, remained fixed upon her task, revealing nothing of whatever thoughts moved behind them. "Her name is Amara," Henrique continued, his voice low and conspiratorial. "She was brought from the coast of Guinea as a child, purchased by my father from a Venetian trader. She serves in my household now." He paused, letting the words settle. I propose a wager, Montero. A simple game of dice. If you win, I shall give you 50 gold cruzados. If I win, his smile widened, you shall take her, as your personal servant, for 1 year. The room fell silent. Rodrigo felt the weight of every gaze upon him, felt the trap closing around him with invisible teeth. To refuse would be seen as weakness, as cowardice. To accept would be to participate in a cruelty that turned his stomach. What is the purpose of such a wager? Rodrigo asked quietly. The purpose? Entertainment, of course. Enrique leaned closer. Unless you believe, as some do, that these creatures have souls equal to our own. Unless you believe that a woman such as this deserves the same consideration as a lady of noble blood. His voice dripped with mockery. Tell me, Montero, do you believe such things? The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Rodrigo understood now what Enrique truly sought. Not gold, not entertainment, but the public humiliation of a man whose family had recently opposed the DS faction at court. A political game dressed in the clothes of idle amusement. Rodrigo looked again at the woman called Amara. She had finished distributing the wine and now stood near the doorway, her hands folded before her, her expression composed and distant. But for the briefest moment, her eyes met his. And in that moment, Rodrigo saw something that surprised him. Not fear, not submission, but a quiet, steady dignity that refused to be diminished by the circumstances in which she found herself. I accept your wager, Rodrigo said, his voice clear and steady. But I propose a modification. If I win, you shall give her her freedom, completely and irrevocably. You shall sign papers of manumission, witnessed by every man in this room. A murmur rippled through the assembled nobles. Enrique's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, harder than before. You would stake 50 gold cruzados against a servant's freedom? I would. And if you lose? If you take her into your household? Rodrigo held his gaze without flinching. Then I shall treat her with the dignity that any human being deserves. I shall give her a position befitting her abilities. And at the end of 1 year, I shall grant her the same freedom you refuse to offer now. Enrique laughed, but there was something uncertain in it now. You are a fool, Montero, a sentimental fool. He snatched up the dice. Very well, let us play. The dice were thrown. They clattered across the wooden table with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Rodrigo watched them tumble and spin, watched them settle into stillness, and felt his heart contract in his chest. He had lost. Enrique's laughter filled the room, harsh and triumphant. It seems fate has spoken, Montero. The woman is yours. Take her and remember this night. Remember that even your noble principles cannot overcome the simple truth of chance. Rodrigo said nothing. He rose from the table, walked past the grinning faces of men who called themselves his equals, and stopped before the woman who now, by the cruel arithmetic of a dice game, belonged to him. What is your name? He asked quietly, though he already knew. Amara, my lord. Her voice was low, musical, carrying traces of an accent that spoke of distant shores and a childhood stolen. Amara. He tested the name on his tongue. From this moment forward you shall serve in the Montero household. You shall be treated with respect by every member of my staff, and I give you my word, before God and all these witnesses, that I shall never raise my hand against you, never speak to you with cruelty, and never forget that you are a person deserving of dignity. He paused. Do you understand? For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Her expression remained composed, guarded, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. I understand, my lord, she said at last. Rodrigo nodded once, then turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, he could hear Enrique's voice rising in mockery. could hear the laughter of men who had witnessed what they believed to be his humiliation. But as he stepped out into the cold night air, as the mist from the river wrapped around him like a shroud, Rodrigo Montero felt something unexpected stir within his chest. Not defeat, not shame, but the first, faint stirring of a purpose he had sought his entire life without ever knowing its name. The carriage ride back to the Montero estate passed in silence. Amara sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed upon some point beyond the window where the dark shapes of Lisbon passed like shadows in a dream. Rodrigo found himself watching her without meaning to, found himself wondering what thoughts moved behind those luminous eyes, what memories she carried from a childhood torn away by violence and greed. "You may speak freely," he said at last. "I do not require silence from those in my household." She turned to look at him, and for the first time, he saw something like curiosity in her expression. "Forgive me, my lord, but I have learned that silence is often the safest course. In Henrique's household, perhaps. Not in mine. You speak of your household as though it were different from all others. I intend for it to be." A pause. The carriage wheels rattled over cobblestones, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the midnight hour. "Why did you make that wager?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew you might lose. You knew you would be bound by your own words." Rodrigo considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I could not stand by and watch a human being treated as nothing more than a prize in a game. Because Henrique's cruelty should not go unchallenged." He paused. "And because I believe that every person, regardless of birth or circumstance, possesses an inherent worth that no wager can diminish." Amara studied him for a long moment. "Those are dangerous beliefs, my lord. In this world, in this time. Perhaps, but they are mine nonetheless." The carriage arrived at the Montero estate as the moon emerged from behind a veil of clouds, bathing the courtyard in silver light. The house rose before them, a grand structure of white stone and red tile, its windows dark save for a single lamp burning in the entrance hall. Rodrigo helped Amara down from the carriage, and for a brief moment his hand touched hers. Her skin was warm. Her fingers trembled slightly, then steadied. "Tomorrow," Rodrigo said, "you shall meet with the head of household and be assigned duties appropriate to your skills. But tonight, you should rest. A room has been prepared." Amara inclined her head. "Thank you, my lord." She turned to follow the servant who had appeared to escort her, but at the doorway, she paused and looked back. The moonlight caught her face, illuminating features that seemed to hold both sorrow and something else, something that might have been hope. "My lord," she said quietly, "I have been in servitude since I was 7 years old. I have known cruelty, indifference, and worse, but I have never known a master who looked at me and saw a person rather than a possession." She paused. "I do not yet know if your words are true, but I shall be watching, and perhaps in time I shall believe." Then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the house, leaving Rodrigo standing alone in the courtyard with the weight of her words settling upon his shoulders like a mantle. He had lost a wager tonight, but something told him that what he had found might prove far more valuable than gold. The night stretched on, silent and cold, and Rodrigo Montero stood beneath the Portuguese stars and wondered what the morning would bring. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like these, where human dignity triumphs over cruelty and love, blooms in the most unexpected places, deserve to be heard. Subscribe now, so you never miss a single tale of courage, redemption, and the quiet power of the human heart. 3 weeks passed, and the Montero household adjusted to the presence of its newest member with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The servants whispered among themselves, speculating about the circumstances of Amara's arrival, about the wager that had brought her here, about the young lord who seemed to treat her with a respect that bordered on the peculiar. Such behavior was unusual. Such behavior invited questions. Amara, for her part, observed everything and revealed nothing. She'd been assigned to work in the household's linen rooms, a position that kept her largely out of sight while allowing her to prove her worth through the quality of her labor. Her hands, skilled from years of service, moved with precision and care over fabrics both common and fine. She spoke little, smiled less, and watched with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her new surroundings. But she was not the only one watching. Rodrigo found himself drawn to the linen rooms more often than duty required, inventing reasons to pass through corridors that led in that direction, pausing at doorways where he might catch a glimpse of her working. He told himself it was concern for her welfare, a desire to ensure that his promises were being honored by his staff. But the truth, which he was only beginning to acknowledge, was far more complicated. On the 23rd day of January, a cold rain fell upon Lisbon, drumming against the windows of the Montero estate with relentless persistence. Rodrigo sat in his study, attempting to focus on correspondence that required his attention, when a knock came at the door. "Enter." The door opened to reveal Helena, the elderly woman who had served as head of household since Rodrigo's childhood. Her face, lined with age and wisdom, bore an expression of careful neutrality. "My lord, I wish to speak with you regarding the new servant, Amara." Rodrigo set down his quill. "Is there a problem?" "Not precisely, my lord. She performs her duties admirably. Indeed, her work is among the finest I have seen in 30 years of service." Helena paused, choosing her words with care. "But there has been talk among the staff. Questions about her position. About your intentions." "My intentions?" "Forgive me for speaking plainly, my lord, but servants talk. They have noticed your attention, your visits to the linen rooms, your inquiries about her welfare." Helena's eyes met his directly. "They wonder if she is to be more than a servant." Rodrigo felt heat rise to his face, though whether from embarrassment or anger, he could not say. "My attention stems from nothing more than a desire to ensure she is treated fairly. She came to this household under unusual circumstances. I feel a responsibility for her welfare." "Of course, my lord." Helena's tone conveyed neither belief nor disbelief. "I merely thought you should know what is being said. In great houses, whispers can become weapons." After Helena departed, Rodrigo sat for a long moment in the gray light of the rainy afternoon, her words echoing in his mind. She was right, of course. Whispers could become weapons. And in a world where a nobleman's reputation was his currency, even the appearance of impropriety could prove devastating. But as he stared into the flames of his hearth, watching them dance and flicker against the darkness, Rodrigo found that he could not bring himself to care. That evening, he sought out Amara in the small sitting room adjacent to the linen chambers, where she often spent her free hours mending garments by candlelight. She looked up as he entered, her needle pausing mid-stitch, her expression shifting from surprise to that careful neutrality he had come to recognize. "My lord." "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." He hesitated at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. "I wish to speak with you, if you are willing." Amara set aside her mending and rose, her movements graceful despite the plainness of her attire. "I am at your disposal, my lord." "Please." The word came out more forcefully than he intended. "Please do not speak to me as though you were merely a servant following orders. I have told you that you may speak freely in my presence." "I meant it." A long pause. The candle flame wavered, casting shifting shadows across her face. "Very well," she said at last. "What do you wish to discuss?" Rodrigo entered the room fully, closing the door behind him. He knew this was improper. He knew the risks. But something stronger than propriety drove him forward. "I wish to know about you," he said simply. "Not the servant. Not the woman who was won in a dice game, but you, Amara, the person beneath the circumstances. She studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, she sat back down and gestured to the chair across from her. Sit, my lord, and I shall tell you what I remember. The rain continued to fall as Amara spoke, her voice low and steady, carrying the weight of memories long buried beneath the necessities of survival. I was born in a village along the coast of Guinea, she began, her eyes growing distant. My mother was a weaver of cloth, renowned throughout our region for the beauty of her patterns. My father was a fisherman who sang songs to the sea each morning before casting his nets. I had 2 brothers and a sister, all younger than myself. She paused, and Rodrigo saw something flicker across her features. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of a happiness that could never be reclaimed. I was 7 years old when the raiders came. They arrived at dawn, when the mist still clung to the shoreline and the village was just beginning to stir. I remember the screams, the smoke, the sight of my mother reaching for me as rough hands tore us apart. Her voice remained steady, but her hands had tightened in her lap, knuckles pale against the darkness of her skin. I never saw my family again. Amara. Rodrigo's voice was rough with emotion. You do not have to continue. No, I wish to. She met his gaze directly. You ask to know me. This is who I am. A child stolen, a girl sold, a woman who has learned to survive in a world that sees her as property rather than person. She paused. But I am also the daughter of a weaver and a fisherman. I carry their blood, their memory, their strength. No matter how many times I am bought and sold, that truth remains unchanged. The candle had burned low, its flames struggling against the encroaching darkness. Rodrigo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his heart heavy with a sorrow he could not fully articulate. I cannot undo what was done to you, he said quietly. I cannot restore your family, your home, your childhood. But I can offer you this. Within the walls of this household, you shall be treated as a person of worth. Your voice shall be heard. Your dignity shall be respected. He paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. And when the year is complete, I shall grant you your freedom, as I promised. You may go wherever you wish, do whatever you choose, build whatever life you desire. Amara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice held a tremor that had not been there before. You speak of freedom as though it were a simple thing. But freedom means nothing to a woman alone in a world that sees her as less than human. Where would I go? What would I do? Who would protect me from men like Enrique Diaz, who see my skin and assume my subjugation? I would protect you. The words escaped before Rodrigo could stop them. They hung in the air between them, charged with a meaning that neither could ignore. Amara's breath caught. My lord. Rodrigo. His voice was barely above a whisper. When we are alone like this, call me Rodrigo. She shook her head slowly, though whether in denial or disbelief he could not tell. You do not know what you are saying. The consequences. I know precisely what I am saying, and I know precisely what the consequences might be. He rose from his chair and moved to kneel before her, looking up into her face with an intensity that seemed to illuminate the very air between them. I have spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, following the path laid out by my father, my grandfather, generations of men who valued duty above all else. But in these weeks since you came into my household, something has changed. Something I cannot explain and cannot ignore. Please. Her voice was strained. Please do not say these things. They will only bring us both to ruin. Perhaps. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were trembling. Or perhaps it was his own. But I find that I no longer care about ruin. I care only about truth. And the truth is this: I see you, Amara, not a servant, not a prize, not a woman defined by the circumstances of her birth. I see you, and what I see is remarkable. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the candlelight like a diamond against velvet. You cannot mean this. I have never meant anything more. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain continued to fall, a gentle rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Then, slowly, tentatively, Amara turned her hand in his, so that their palms pressed together, their fingers intertwined. If you speak the truth, she whispered, then you must understand what you are risking. Your family, your position, everything you have known. I understand. And still you would choose this path? Rodrigo lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture of reverence rather than possession. I would choose you, he said simply, whatever the cost. The candle guttered and died, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the rain-streaked window. And in that darkness, two souls who should never have found each other sat in silence, hands clasped, hearts beating in a rhythm that defied every boundary their world had constructed. Outside, the storm began to fade, and the first stars emerged from behind the clouds like promises waiting to be kept. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe that love can transcend the boundaries that society constructs, then leave a comment saying, "Love sees no chains." Let me know that you too believe in the power of connection that defies all odds. Winter softened into spring, and with the warming days came changes both subtle and profound within the Montero household. The whispers among the servants had not ceased, but they had taken on a different quality, a note of wonder replacing the earlier suspicion. For it had become impossible to ignore the transformation taking place before their eyes. Rodrigo had begun teaching Amara to read. Each evening, after the day's duties were complete, they would meet in his study, and he would guide her through the mysteries of letters and words with a patience that surprised even himself. She proved a quick learner, her intelligence evident in the rapidity with which she absorbed new concepts, the incisive questions she posed, the connections she drew between ideas. You have a remarkable mind, Rodrigo told her one evening, as she successfully decoded a passage from a book of Portuguese poetry. You should have been educated from childhood. In my village, I was being educated, Amara replied, a note of pride in her voice. My mother taught me the patterns of her weaving, which are themselves a language. My father taught me to read the sea, to understand its moods and movements. Knowledge takes many forms, Rodrigo. The Portuguese alphabet is merely one. He smiled, struck as always by the depth of her wisdom. You are right, of course. Forgive my assumption. There is nothing to forgive. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. Warmth, trust, and perhaps, just perhaps, the first tender shoots of something more. But their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed beyond the household walls. On the 15th of April, Rodrigo received a summons to the home of his father, Dom Álvaro Montero. The elder Montero had retired from active involvement in court affairs some years earlier, preferring to manage his estates from the family's country property outside Sintra. That he had called his son to attend him personally suggested a matter of some gravity. The journey to Sintra took half a day by horseback. Rodrigo rode alone, declining the company of servants, needing the solitude to prepare himself for what he suspected was coming. The countryside unfolded around him in a tapestry of green hills and flowering orchards, the beauty of the landscape providing a stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. Dom Álvaro received his son in the great hall of the country estate, a room dominated by a massive fireplace and portraits of Montero ancestors stretching back centuries. The old man sat in a high-backed chair, his once powerful frame diminished by age, but his eyes still sharp, still piercing. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to a chair that had been placed before him. Rodrigo sat. For a long moment, Dom Alvaro simply looked at his son, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. I have received disturbing reports from Lisbon, reports concerning a servant in your household, a Moorish woman. She is not Moorish, father. She is from Guinea. The distinction is irrelevant. Dom Alvaro's voice hardened. What is relevant is that you have apparently become attached to this woman, that you spend your evenings in her company, that you treat her with a familiarity that borders on scandal. Rodrigo met his father's gaze without flinching. I treat her with the dignity that any human being deserves. Dignity? The word came out like a curse. She is a servant, Rodrigo, a slave, a creature purchased for gold whose only value lies in the labor she can provide. And you speak of dignity? I speak of the truth as I understand it. Dom Alvaro leaned forward, his eyes blazing. Then let me speak of truth as the world understands it. You are the heir to the Montero fortune. You are promised to Beatriz de Melo, a woman of impeccable breeding whose family's alliance with ours will strengthen our position at court for generations. And you would throw all of this away for what? For a fleeting infatuation with a woman who can never be your equal? Rodrigo felt something harden within him. She is my equal in every way that matters. In intelligence, in dignity, in moral worth. Moral worth! Dom Alvaro laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You speak like a priest, not a nobleman. The world does not operate according to moral worth, my son. It operates according to power, position, and blood. And the blood of that woman will never be acceptable in noble society. Then perhaps noble society is wrong. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Dom Alvaro's face went pale, then flushed with anger. You will end this attachment immediately. You will send the woman away, sell her if necessary, and you will proceed with your marriage to Beatriz de Melo as arranged. If you refuse, I will have no choice but to disinherit you. You will lose everything. The estate, the title, the fortune. Everything your ancestors built across 7 generations. Rodrigo rose from his chair. His heart was pounding, but his voice remained steady. Then I shall lose everything. Dom Alvaro stared at him as though seeing a stranger. You cannot mean this. I do. Rodrigo moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at his father. All my life, you taught me to value honor above all else, to speak the truth, to keep my word, to treat others with justice. Were those merely words, father? Or did you mean them? The old man said nothing. His face had gone gray, his hands trembling on the arms of his chair. I love her, Rodrigo said quietly. I love her intelligence, her courage, her dignity in the face of circumstances that would have broken lesser souls. I love the way she sees the world, the questions she asks, the person she has become despite everything that was taken from her. And I will not abandon her to preserve a fortune built on the same system that stole her from her family. He opened the door. If that makes me a fool, he added, then I shall be a fool gladly. The door closed behind him with a sound of finality. And as Rodrigo mounted his horse and began the long ride back to Lisbon, he felt not the despair of a man who had lost everything, but the strange, fierce joy of a man who had finally found something worth losing everything for. When Rodrigo returned to the Lisbon estate, he found Amara waiting for him in the courtyard. The setting sun painted the white walls in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment she seemed to glow with an inner light that took his breath away. You know, she said. It was not a question. I know what? That Henrique Diaz came here while you were away. That he brought men with him, lawyers carrying documents. Her voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that masked deeper fears. He claims that the wager was invalid, that I still belong to him. Rodrigo felt ice form in his chest. On what grounds? He says you had no right to modify the terms of the wager. That by demanding my freedom as a stake, you violated the original agreement. His lawyers have prepared a case to be heard before the magistrate. That is absurd. Every man in that room heard the terms. Every man agreed to witness. Henrique has wealth, my lord. Wealth can purchase many things, including witnesses willing to remember events differently. Rodrigo crossed the courtyard in 3 strides and took her hands in his. Listen to me. I will not let him take you. I will fight this with every resource I possess. You may not have those resources for long. Her eyes searched his face. I have heard the servants talking. Your father has threatened to disinherit you. If you lose your fortune, you will have nothing with which to fight. I will have myself, my word, my honor. Honor does not fill hungry bellies, Rodrigo. Honor does not provide shelter from the cold. He released her hands and stepped back, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. What would you have me do? Abandon you to appease my father? Sacrifice your freedom to preserve my inheritance? I would have you survive. Her voice cracked for the first time, revealing the fear she had fought so hard to conceal. I have known cruelty all my life. I have learned to endure it. But I could not endure being the cause of your destruction. If you lose everything because of me, then I shall have lost it for the right reasons. You do not understand. Tears were flowing freely now, streaming down her cheeks like rivers of grief. I am not worth this sacrifice. I am nothing. A stolen child, a purchased servant, a woman with no family, no country, no name that anyone recognizes. You are offering to destroy yourself for nothing. Rodrigo stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, gently tilting her gaze to meet his. You are not nothing, he said, his voice fierce with conviction. You are Amara, the daughter of a weaver and a fisherman, a woman of intelligence, courage, and dignity that would put most nobles to shame. And you are... He paused, feeling the weight of the words before he spoke them. You are the woman I love. Her breath caught. Rodrigo, I love you. I have loved you since the night I first heard you singing in the servants' quarters, thinking yourself alone. I have loved you through every lesson, every conversation, every moment of connection that we have shared. And I will love you whether I am rich or poor, noble or outcast, accepted or reviled. He lowered his forehead to touch hers. Do not ask me to stop. I could not even if I wished to. For a long moment they stood there in the fading light, breathing together, hearts beating in tandem. Then Amara's hands rose to cover his own, and she spoke the words that would change everything. Then we fight together, whatever comes. The hearing before the magistrate was scheduled for the 28th of May. In the weeks leading up to it, Rodrigo worked tirelessly to build his case, gathering documents, interviewing witnesses, consulting with lawyers who were willing to take his side despite the risk to their own reputations. But Henrique Diaz had not been idle. Word reached Rodrigo that powerful allies were being assembled, that bribes were being paid, that the outcome of the hearing had been all but decided before it began. On the morning of the hearing, Rodrigo and Amara arrived at the magistrate's chambers together. It was an unprecedented act, bringing a servant to stand beside him as an equal before the law. The murmurs that greeted their entrance were loud enough to hear, shock and disapproval mixing with something that might have been admiration. The magistrate, an elderly man named Dom Sebastião Ferreira, surveyed the assembled crowd with weary eyes. Henrique Diaz stood on one side of the chamber, flanked by his lawyers and a half-dozen men who would testify on his behalf. Rodrigo stood on the other, accompanied only by Amara and a single lawyer who had agreed to represent him. We are gathered to hear the matter of ownership concerning the woman known as Amara, Dom Sebastião began. Dom Henrique Diaz claims that the wager under which she was transferred to Dom Rodrigo Montero was invalid, and that she remains his legal property. Dom Rodrigo Montero disputes this claim. Let us hear the arguments. Enrique's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth and confident. He described the original wager, emphasized that Rodrigo had violated its terms by introducing conditions that were never agreed upon, and presented witness after witness who testified that the modification had been invalid. Rodrigo listened in growing despair. The witnesses were lying, he knew, their memories conveniently altered by gold. But proving lies was nearly impossible when the liars were united and well compensated. When it came time for Rodrigo to speak, he rose and addressed the magistrate directly. Dom Sebastião, I will not waste your time disputing the testimony of men whose memories have been purchased. Instead, I wish to pose a simple question. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What is the nature of a wager? Is it not an agreement between parties, witnessed by others, with terms that are clearly stated and accepted by all? And on the night in question, were the terms of my modification not clearly stated? Were they not accepted by Dom Henrique himself, who threw the dice knowing full well what was at stake? He turned to face Henrique directly. You accepted the wager, you threw the dice, you won. And now you claim that the wager you won was invalid? Rodrigo shook his head. Even by the standards of men who treat human beings as property, this is dishonest. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dom Sebastião leaned forward. Do you have witnesses to support your version of events, Dom Rodrigo? I have my word, and I have the word of the woman whose freedom is at stake. Rodrigo reached out and took Amara's hand, drawing her forward to stand beside him. Let her speak. Let her testify to what she witnessed that night. Enrique's lawyer objected immediately. A slave cannot testify in legal proceedings. Her word holds no weight. She is not a slave, Rodrigo replied, his voice rising. She is a woman, a human being. And her word holds the same weight as any other person's in the eyes of God, if not in the eyes of this court. Dom Sebastião raised his hand for silence. His expression was troubled, torn between the letter of the law and something deeper that Rodrigo's words had stirred. I shall hear her testimony, he said at last. Not as legal evidence, but as information that may illuminate the truth. Amara stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. I was there on the night in question. I heard every word that was spoken. Dom Rodrigo modified the wager, stating clearly that if he won, I would receive my freedom. Dom Henrique accepted these terms with a smile. He believed he would win. He believed he was mocking Dom Rodrigo's principles by playing along with what he saw as a foolish gesture. She paused. He was wrong. But he accepted. Every man in that room heard him accept. She turned to face Henrique, and in her eyes burned a fire that could not be extinguished. You lost nothing that night, Dom Henrique. You lost a servant, yes. But Dom Rodrigo lost gold. He was the one who gambled something of value. You merely gambled your honor. And honor, it seems, was something you never possessed to begin with. The silence that followed was absolute. Dom Sebastião sat motionless, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he spoke. I have heard enough. This court finds that the wager was valid as modified. The woman Amara was legally transferred to Dom Rodrigo Montero on the night in question. Dom Henrique's claim is dismissed. Henrique erupted in fury, shouting objections that were ignored as Dom Sebastião rose and departed. But Rodrigo barely heard him. He was looking at Amara, at the tears streaming down her face, at the smile that broke through like sunlight after storm. It is over, she whispered. No. Rodrigo pulled her into his arms, heedless of the crowd, heedless of propriety, heedless of everything except the woman he held. It is only beginning. The spring of 1413 arrived in Lisbon with an explosion of color, azaleas and bougainvillea, transforming the city's gardens into tapestries of pink and purple and red. The Tagus River sparkled beneath the afternoon sun, and the air carried the scent of orange blossoms from the orchards beyond the city walls. In a modest house on the outskirts of the Alfama district, far from the grand estates of the nobility, a man and a woman sat together in a garden filled with flowers that she had planted with her own hands. Rodrigo Montero had lost his inheritance as his father had promised. The great estate, the title, the fortune accumulated across 7 generations, all of it had passed to a distant cousin who was willing to marry Beatriz de Mello and carry on the family name. Rodrigo had been left with nothing but the small sum his mother had set aside for him before her death, enough to purchase a modest home and establish a small trading business that would never make him rich, but would keep them comfortable. He had never been happier. "You are quiet today," Amara said, looking up from the book she was reading. Her literacy had blossomed over the past year, and she now devoured texts with a hunger that delighted him. "What are you thinking?" Rodrigo smiled, reaching out to take her hand. On her finger, a simple gold band caught the sunlight, the symbol of a marriage that had scandalized society and vindicated his soul. "I am thinking about wagers," he said. "About how a man can lose everything he thought he wanted and gain everything he never knew he needed." Amara laughed, the sound like music in the garden. "You have become quite philosophical in your reduced circumstances. I've had an excellent teacher." She set aside her book and moved to sit beside him on the garden bench. Her head came to rest on his shoulder, and for a moment, they simply breathed together, watching the butterflies dance among the flowers. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Everything you gave up?" Rodrigo considered the question carefully, as he always did when she asked it, and his answer, as always, was the same. "I gave up nothing that mattered. I gained everything that does." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I gained you." Amara lifted her head and looked into his eyes. The fear that had once shadowed her gaze was gone, replaced by a peace that had been hard-won and fiercely protected. "Then we are both fortunate," she said, "for I gained you as well." The church bells of Lisbon began to toll the evening hour, their sound drifting across the city like a benediction. In their modest garden, surrounded by flowers and the golden light of sunset, Rodrigo and Amara Montero held each other and listened. They had lost much. They had risked more. But in the end, they had found what mattered most. A love that transcended the boundaries of birth and station, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared conviction, a life that was small in material terms but vast in meaning. It was, Rodrigo reflected, the best wager he had ever made. And as the sun set over Lisbon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the man who had lost everything and the woman who had been treated as nothing held hands in their garden and watched the stars emerge, one by one, like promises kept at last.